My name is Gary Poncho, and I've been a tribal police officer for the Coushatta Nation of Louisiana for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you will sound like the ravings of someone who spent too much time in the heat and humidity of the Bayou, but every word is documented in reports that the federal government has classified under provisions I'm not supposed to know exist. The Coushatta Reservation sits in Allen Parish, in the heart of Louisiana, about 3 hours northwest of New Orleans. Most people know us for our casino, Coushatta Casino Resort, the second largest in Louisiana. They come for the slots, the poker, the concerts. They don't know about the 400 acres of swamp on the eastern edge of our land, the part that's been unmapped since 1842, the part where our jurisdiction technically extends but practically ends at sunset. If you're watching this from anywhere in Louisiana, you've probably heard the stories. The rougarou, what the Cajuns call their werewolf, fifole, the swamp lights that lead travelers to their deaths, the ghosts of slaves who escaped to these swamps and never escaped from them. You probably think they're just stories, folklore to scare children and tourists. You're half right, they are stories, but stories in the Bayou have a way of growing teeth. I grew up on the reservation, speaking Coasati, our traditional language, before I learned English. My grandmother, who we called Nitak, was a traditional healer. She knew the old ways, the medicines, the prayers that had been passed down since before the French arrived in Louisiana. She also knew about the boundaries, the places where our world touched others, where things that shouldn't exist found ways to cross over. Gary, she told me when I joined the tribal police, you carry a gun and a badge now, but remember, there are things in the Atchafalaya that neither bullet nor law can touch. The white man's authority ends at the courthouse steps. Our authority ends where the cypress trees grow in perfect circles, and God's authority, well, even he seems to have forgotten some parts of the Bayou. I thought it was just Nitak being dramatic. Old people, especially traditional ones, they like their warnings and their mysteries. But I should have listened more carefully. I should have paid attention to the way she never let me play near the eastern swamp as a child, the way she'd burn sage and sweetgrass whenever I came back from that direction, even as a teenager just passing by on the road. The first sign that something was wrong came in September 2023, just 4 months ago. It started, as these things often do, with a missing person report. His name was David Brown, a software engineer from Houston who'd come to the casino for a bachelor party weekend. According to his friends, David had hit it big on the progressive slots, $387,000 at 2:47 a.m. on a Saturday night. Security footage showed him celebrating, collecting his winnings, taking the pictures with the oversized check. He left the casino at 3:33 a.m., saying he wanted to see the real Louisiana before heading back to Texas. His rental car was found 3 days later on Parish Road 417, right at the edge of our jurisdiction where the maintained land meets the unmapped swamp. The engine was still running, the driver's door open, his winnings in a duffel bag on the passenger seat, untouched. His phone was on the hood of the car, displaying a compass app that was spinning wildly, unable to find north. I was the responding officer, along with my partner James Bellamont. James was Creole, not Coushatta, but he'd grown up in the area and knew the swamps better than most. He took one look at where the car was parked and shook his head. "Tonnerre m'écrase," he muttered, a Creole expression that roughly translates to "thunder crush me." "This is a bad place, Gary. My grand-mère says this is where the rougarou feeds." "Your grand-mère says the rougarou feeds everywhere," I replied, but I was studying the scene carefully. There were footprints leading from the car into the swamp, but they were wrong. They started as normal shoe prints, size 10 Nikes matching what Brown had been wearing. But about 10 feet from the car, they began to change. The left foot remained human, but the right became something else, longer, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. Maybe he stepped on something, James suggested, but we both knew he was reaching. The transformation in the prints was gradual, systematic. Over the course of about 20 feet, David Brown's footprints changed from fully human to fully something else. Then they disappeared entirely at the edge of the water. We called in additional resources, state police, search and rescue, even a helicopter from the Coast Guard station in New Orleans. For 3 days we searched. We found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a trace of blood, nothing. It was as if David Brown had walked into the swamp and been absorbed by it. But on the 4th night, something happened that changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my land, and the nature of reality itself. I was working the night shift, patrolling the casino parking lot, routine stuff, making sure drunk gamblers got to their cars safely, breaking up the occasional fight over perceived slot machine slights. It was about 3 a.m. when I got the call from dispatch. "Gary, we've got a situation at the eastern boundary. Parish Road 417 again." My blood chilled. Same location as Brown's abandoned car. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "Caller reports seeing someone walking out of the swamp. Says it might be the missing person." I drove out there with lights and sirens, my hand unconsciously checking my weapon. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association training had prepared me for a lot, but as I would soon learn, it hadn't prepared me for this. When I arrived, there was already a small crowd. 3 cars had stopped, their headlights pointing toward the swamp. Standing at the edge of the road, soaking wet and covered in mud, was David Brown. But it wasn't David Brown. I mean, it was him. DNA would later confirm that. But something fundamental had changed. His eyes, which had been brown in his driver's license photo, were now a pale yellow, like a cat's. His fingers were too long with too many joints, and when he smiled at me, his teeth were filed to points. "Officer," he said, and his voice had harmonics that human voices shouldn't have. "I want to report a crime. Mr. Brown." I approached carefully. "Are you all right? We've been looking for you for 4 days." He tilted his head, a gesture that went about 30 degrees too far to be human. 4 days. "No, officer. I've been gone for 7 years. Check your calendar." I looked at my phone. September 15th, 2023. "Sir, it's only been—" "Check the other calendar," he interrupted. "The one that counts moonless nights and births of 2-headed calves. The calendar that knows when the rougarou hunts and when the fefilid dance. That calendar, officer, says 7 years." James had his hand on his weapon, but I motioned for him to stand down. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be solved with bullets. "Mr. Brown, why don't you come with us? We'll get you to a hospital, get you checked out." He laughed, a sound like water running backwards. "Hospital?" "Officer Poncho." "Yes, I know your name, the swamp told me. I don't need a hospital. I need you to listen. There's going to be more. The hurricane changed things, shifted boundaries that should never shift. The casino sits on a crossing point now, and every winner who takes their money after 3 a.m. is marked." "Marked for what?" James asked. Brown's yellow eyes fixed on him. "For the trade. The Bayou needs souls to keep the barriers intact. It's been taking them at random, hunters, fishermen, lost tourists, but now it's found a more efficient system. The casino draws them in, marks them with fortune, and the swamp collects." He reached into his pocket, and both James and I tensed, but he pulled out only a piece of paper, wet, muddy, but somehow still intact. It was a page from what looked like a ledger, written in a mixture of French, English, and symbols I didn't recognize. "This is from 1842, he said. "The last time someone tried to map the eastern swamp. The surveyor, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, found something there. Not oil, not gas, not gold. A door. A door that should never have been found, should never have been opened. But the Coushatta knew. Your ancestors knew. That's why they agreed to take this land when the government offered it. Not because it was good land, but because someone had to guard it." I took the paper, careful not to touch his elongated fingers. The writing was faded, but I could make out some words. Porte entre les mondes, door between worlds, guardians, guardians, and repeatedly, obsessively Mapdei, ne jamais ouvrir après le coucher du soleil, never open after sunset. "Mr. Brown," I said carefully, "I need you to come with us now." He nodded, but as he walked towards my patrol car, he paused. "Officer Poncho, you're going to want to check the security footage from the casino. Not from tonight. From September 15th, 1997. You'll find something interesting. You'll find me." "That's impossible. I wasn't born yet in 1997. He smiled those pointed teeth again. "No, I wasn't. But time moves differently in the swamp. Past, present, future. They're all just directions you can walk if you know the paths." We took him to the station, not the hospital. I had a feeling medical doctors wouldn't know what to do with his condition. While James processed him, or tried to, as our computer systems kept glitching every time he touched them, I did something I should have done years ago. I went to talk to the elders. The Coushatta Tribal Council meets in a building that's modern on the outside but traditional on the inside. The conference room smells of sage, tobacco, and old leather. The 5 elders who make up the Cultural Preservation Committee were waiting for me, as if they'd known I was coming. "Took you long enough," said Patricia Sickie, the eldest at 93. She spoke in Coasati, and I responded in kind, feeling like a child called before the principal. "Grandmother," I said, using the respectful term, "there's something happening in the eastern swamp." "There's always been something happening in the eastern swamp," she replied. "Since before the French, before the Spanish, before even we came to this land. The question is, are you ready to know about it?" Joseph Abbey, the keeper of oral histories, pulled out a leather-bound book that looked older than the building we were in. "In 1718, he began, when the French were establishing New Orleans, they sent explorers throughout Louisiana to map the territory. One group, led by a man named Francois de la Croix, found something in what would later become our eastern swamp." He opened the book, revealing pages of handwritten text and disturbing illustrations. Creatures that were part human, part alligator. Trees that grew downward into the earth instead of up toward the sky. And repeated drawings of a massive cypress tree with a hollow trunk, inside which was what looked like a spiral staircase descending into darkness. "De la Croix's men entered that tree," Joseph continued. 7 went down, 3 came back, but the 3 who returned weren't the same 3 who had descended. They were versions of those men from different possibilities, different worlds where history had gone differently. One claimed to be from a world where France had never sold Louisiana. Another from a world where the native tribes had guns before Europeans arrived. The third said he was from a world where humans had never evolved, where something else had taken our place. "What happened to them?" I asked. "The French burned them as demons," Patricia said matter-of-factly, "but they couldn't burn what they'd learned." The doorway in the cypress tree led to other versions of our world, parallel realities where different choices had led to different outcomes, and sometimes things from those other worlds would come through. "The Rougarou," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. is not from our world, no, Joseph confirmed. It came through during the full moon of 1754. A hunting party in its world had driven it through the doorway. It couldn't get back, so it stayed, and it adapted, and it became part of our folklore. But why is it getting worse now? I asked. David Brown, yes, the Winners, Patricia interrupted. That was not our doing. When Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, it did more than flood New Orleans. The storm surge pushed salt water deep into the swamp, changing the mineral composition of the water. Salt, you see, disrupts the barriers between worlds. The doorway, which had been mostly stable for centuries, began to fluctuate. She pulled out a modern tablet computer, which seemed incongruous in her ancient hands, and showed me a map. It was our reservation, but overlaid with what looked like thermal imaging. There were hot spots throughout, but the eastern swamp was a blazing inferno of activity. Every time someone wins big at the casino after 3 a.m., she explained, when the veil is thinnest, they create a sympathetic vibration with the abundance energy of other worlds. The swamp calls to them, offers them more money, more time, more life. Some resist. Others, like Mr. Brown, do not. But he came back, I pointed out. Did he? Joseph asked. Or did something wearing his shape come back? The David Brown who walked into the swamp was a software engineer from Houston. The thing that walked out knows languages that won't be invented for 100 years and remembers events that haven't happened yet. I thought about Brown's yellow eyes, his pointed teeth, his fingers with too many joints. What do we do? Patricia and Joseph exchanged glances. There's a reason, Patricia said slowly, that our ancestors agreed to guard this land, not just to keep people from going in, but to keep things from coming out. The tribal police have always had a dual role, public safety and boundary enforcement. She stood up, moving to an old wooden cabinet I'd never noticed before. From it, she pulled out a badge. Not a modern police badge, but something older, made of silver and copper twisted together, with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Your great-grandfather wore this, she said, and his father before him. The official tribal police force was established in 1975, but the true peacekeepers have been here much longer. It's time you learned about your real job, Gary Poncho. She handed me the badge, and the moment it touched my skin, I saw everything. Every creature that had crossed through the doorway, every reality that pressed against ours, every sacrifice made by my ancestors to keep the worlds in balance. I saw the truth. The Coushatta Reservation wasn't just a piece of land held in trust by the federal government. It was a fortress, a guard post, a thin line of defense against infinite variations of reality, each trying to bleed into our world. And I saw David Brown, not the one in our holding cell, but hundreds of versions of him across hundreds of realities. In some, he never came to Louisiana. In others, he owned the casino. In one particularly disturbing variation, he was the Rougarou, hunting his human self through the swamp in an endless loop. The question now, Patricia said, her voice pulling me back to our single, precious reality, is what you're going to do about it. The boundaries are weakening. More will be marked, more will be taken, and eventually, if nothing is done, the doorway will open completely. What happens then? I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. Then, Joseph said quietly, we find out which reality is strongest. And the losers cease to exist entirely. I looked down at the ancient badge in my hand, feeling its weight, not just physical, but the weight of responsibility it carried. I thought about my oath to protect and serve, but now understood it meant protecting reality itself and serving as guardian between worlds. "Tell me everything," I said. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave anything out." Patricia smiled, the first warm expression I'd seen from her. "The beginning? Child, in the swamp, there is no beginning, no ending, just the eternal cycle of what is, what was, and what might be. But I'll tell you what you need to know to survive the next few weeks. Because something big is coming. The equinox is in 6 days, and that's when the boundaries are weakest. If we're going to prevent a catastrophe, we need to act fast." She was right. What happened during those 6 days would determine not just the fate of our small reservation, but possibly the nature of reality itself in Louisiana. And it started with David Brown, or the thing pretending to be him, sitting in our holding cell, waiting patiently for something none of us fully understood. I clipped the ancient badge next to my modern one and prepared for a crash course in interdimensional law enforcement. Because in the Bayou, where the cypress trees grow in perfect circles and the water flows upward during certain moons, jurisdiction doesn't end at sunset. It just extends into territories no law school ever prepared me for. The education I received from the elders over the next 48 hours made my police academy training look like kindergarten. They taught me to see the signs I'd been blind to my entire life. The way certain birds flew in patterns that mapped dimensional weak points, how the casino's slot machines sometimes displayed symbols that didn't exist on their programming reels, why the French fries at the buffet occasionally tasted like memories of potatoes that had never been planted. But the most disturbing lesson came when Patricia took me to see the archives beneath the tribal headquarters. I'd never known there was a basement level. The building sat on swampland, after all. But she led me to what looked like a maintenance closet, pressed her hand against a seemingly blank wall, and spoke a phrase in old Coasati that predated any version of the language I knew. The wall shimmered and became a staircase descending into impossible depths. "The French weren't the first to find the doorway," she explained, as we descended. "And the Coushatta weren't the first indigenous people to guard it. This responsibility has been passed from tribe to tribe for over 1,000 years, maybe longer. Time gets fuzzy when you're dealing with multiple realities." The archive was a vast underground chamber that shouldn't have been able to exist. The water table in Louisiana would have flooded it instantly. But the walls were bone dry, covered in a mixture of cave paintings, photographs, and flat-screen monitors showing feeds from hidden cameras throughout the swamp. "This is the true history," Patricia said, gesturing to the walls. "Every incursion, every crossing, every time someone or something has passed between worlds." I walked along the displays, seeing impossible things documented with bureaucratic precision. A Civil War battle in 1863 where Confederate soldiers reported fighting Union troops that flickered like candle flames and spoke in languages not yet invented. A 1921 jazz musician who played notes that didn't exist, causing 3 audience members to phase partially into another reality, where sound had color and color had taste. The 1974 disappearance of an entire Greyhound bus on Highway 190. 23 passengers who were found 3 days later, claiming they'd lived full lives in another Louisiana where the Mississippi River flowed backward. "And this," Patricia said, stopping at a modern display, "is why your current situation is so critical." The screen showed a graph tracking dimensional incursions over time. For centuries, the line was relatively flat, with occasional spikes during full moons, eclipses, and major storms. But starting in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, the line shot upward exponentially. "The saltwater disruption was bad enough," she explained, "but there was something else. The Army Corps of Engineers, when they rebuilt the levees, They used a special concrete mixture, classified project. They thought they were making them stronger against future storms. She pulled up another document, this one marked with Department of Defense stamps. They mixed crushed limestone from a quarry in Missouri with the concrete. What they didn't know was that limestone came from a meteor impact site. It contained trace elements of meteoric metal that resonates at the same frequency as the dimensional barriers. They turned the levees into tuning forks, I breathed. Every time water hits them at a certain pressure, it sends out a vibration that weakens the boundaries. The casino, built in 2001, sits at the exact convergence point of these vibrations. That's why winners after 3 a.m. are marked. They're at the focal point when the barriers are thinnest. I thought about David Brown sitting in our holding cell. What about the people who get taken? What really happens to them? Patricia led me to another section of the archive. Here, the displays were more disturbing. Photos of people who had returned from the swamp, but wrong. A fisherman from 1968 who came back with his internal organs on the wrong sides of his body. A teenage girl from 1989 who returned speaking only in mathematical equations that, when solved, predicted lottery numbers for drawings that would never happen. A survey team from 2003 that walked out of the swamp as a single organism, 4 bodies sharing one consciousness. Some come back changed, Patricia said. Others come back as something else wearing their skin. And some, she showed me a final photo, a man I recognized as my own great-uncle, who had disappeared when I was 5. Some find what they're looking for in the other worlds and choose not to return. We went back upstairs, my mind reeling from everything I'd learned. James was waiting in the office, looking concerned. "Gary, we have a problem," he said. "Brown's not in his cell." We rushed to the holding area. The cell door was still locked. The security footage showed nothing unusual, but David Brown was gone. In his place, drawn on the floor in what looked like casino chips melted and reformed, was a message. "The trade begins at the equinox. 7 have been marked. The doorway demands its due." Patricia examined the message and shook her head. "It's worse than I thought. The entity wearing Brown's form isn't just a refugee from another reality. It's a herald. Something's coming through, something big, and it's using the marked winners as anchor points. We need to find out who else has been marked," I said. "Pull all the casino records for big winners in the last month, anyone who won after 3 a.m. James was already on his computer. "I've got 6 more names. All won between $50,000 and $500,000. All between 3 and 4 a.m. And Gary, 2 of them have already been reported missing. The first was Jennifer Tran, a real estate agent from Baton Rouge who'd won $127,000 on blackjack. She'd disappeared 3 days after Brown, her car found at the same spot on Parish Road 417. The second was Robert Williams, a retired teacher from Lafayette who'd hit an $89,000 progressive jackpot. He'd vanished from his hotel room, the door locked from the inside, the window painted shut. "That leaves 4 potential victims," I said. "We need to find them before—" My phone rang. It was dispatch. "Gary, we've got a situation at the casino. Guest is having some kind of breakdown in the high roller room. Says the slot machines are talking to him. The guest was Anthony Bergeron, a oil rig worker from Morgan City. According to our records, he'd won $234,000 on the slots 5 nights ago at 3:17 a.m. When James and I arrived, casino security had him cornered in the VIP lounge, but they were keeping their distance. I could see why. Anthony was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by slot machines that were behaving impossibly. The digital displays showed not cherries and sevens, but faces. Human faces twisted in expressions of ecstasy or agony. The machines were speaking, but not in any language from our reality. It sounded like backwards French mixed with electronic static and what might have been screaming. "Mr. Bergeron," I called out, approaching slowly. "I'm Officer Poncho with Tribal Police. We're here to help." He turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes were shifting through different colors like a slot machine cycling through its reels: blue, green, brown, yellow, then colors that didn't have names. "They're calling me home," he said, his voice layered with harmonics. "Not my home. Their home. The place where luck is a physical law and probability is negotiable. Anthony, you need to come with us. We can protect you." He laughed, a sound like coins falling into an infinite pit. "Protect me? Officer, I've won the ultimate jackpot. I've been selected for transcendence. In 6 days, when the equinox tears the veil, I'll become something glorious. Or something will wear your skin like a suit," James muttered. Anthony's shifting eyes fixed on him. "Same difference, mon ami. We're all just costumes for consciousness anyway. The question is, whose consciousness gets to drive?" Before we could respond, every slot machine in the casino went haywire simultaneously. Not just the ones in the high roller room, every single machine. They all displayed the same message. The house always wins, but which house and in which reality? Then Anthony started changing, not all at once, but in pieces. His left hand became translucent, showing the bones and blood vessels beneath. His right foot aged 60 years in seconds, becoming wrinkled and arthritic. His hair grew 3 feet, then fell out, then regrew as feathers. "It's starting early," Patricia's voice said from behind me. She'd arrived with the other elders, all carrying items I didn't recognize, bundles of herbs that glowed with their own light, carved wooden sticks that bent space around them, and a mason jar filled with what looked like liquid darkness. "The equinox isn't for 6 days, I protested. "The casino has accelerated the timeline," Joseph Abbey explained, pulling out an instrument that looked like a cross between a dowsing rod and a satellite dish. "Every win weakens the barrier. Every jackpot is a crack in reality. Mr. Bergeron here has won so much he's become a walking dimensional rift." Anthony laughed again, his form continuing to shift and change. "You want to know the funny part? I didn't even want to gamble. I came here for my sister's birthday. But the machines called to me. They knew I had the right resonance, the right spiritual frequency. They chose me. They chose all 7 of you," Patricia said. "You're the keys to open the doorway fully, but we're not going to let that happen." She threw the liquid darkness from the mason jar at Anthony. Where it touched him, his form stabilized, the changes stopping mid-transformation. He screamed, a sound that shattered every piece of glass in a 30-foot radius. "What did you do to me?" he demanded. "Anchored you to this reality," Patricia replied. "Temporarily. But it won't hold once the equinox arrives. We need to find the other marked ones and do the same, or they'll all transform simultaneously." We managed to get Anthony to the tribal headquarters, where the elders had set up what they called a reality stabilization field, using equipment that looked like a mixture of traditional Native American artifacts and bleeding-edge quantum technology. He sat in the center, looking miserable but human. "The swamp is hungry," he kept muttering. "It's been feeding on lost souls for centuries, but it wants more. It wants the jackpot. All 7 of us, transformed and transcendent, will give it enough power to fully manifest in our reality." "Manifest what?" I asked. Anthony looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "The Bayou monarch? The thing that rules all the parallel Louisianas. It's been trying to consolidate its power across all realities, and our world is the linchpin. If it succeeds here, it succeeds everywhere. Over the next 2 days, we managed to locate 3 of the remaining 4 marked winners. Maria Santos, a nurse from New Orleans who'd won $76,000, was found standing in Lake Pontchartrain up to her waist, having a conversation with her reflection, which was moving independently and speaking in a language she didn't know. We pulled her out just as her reflection was reaching through the water's surface to pull her in. Tommy Landry, a construction worker from Shreveport who'd won $158,000, we found in his apartment, which had become dimensionally unstable. The living room existed on Tuesday, while the Kit Brown was stuck in next Thursday. His bedroom was cycling through different decades. We watched it go from 1950s decor to 2090s holographic furniture and back again. Tommy himself was aging and de-aging with each cycle. Patricia managed to stabilize him at his current age, but said it was like trying to hold water in a net made of smoke. The third was Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a physics professor from Tulane who'd won $445,000. She was the most coherent of all of them, possibly because her scientific training had prepared her to accept impossible realities. When we found her, she was in her laboratory, calmly documenting her transformation. "Officer Pancho," she said when she saw me, "I've been expecting you. I've calculated the probability wave collapse that will occur at the equinox. Would you like to see the math?" She showed me equations that made my head hurt just looking at them. They described how 7 synchronized dimensional rifts would create what she called a reality cascade, a chain reaction that would merge not just parallel Louisianas, but parallel Earths. "The entity you call the Bayou monarch," she explained, "exists in a superposition across infinite realities. It's a quantum entangled with every version of the Louisiana swamps. By marking 7 winners, 7 is a prime number with special significance in dimensional mathematics. It's creating the conditions for a controlled collapse of the probability wave. When that happens, all versions of the Bayou monarch will become one, and it will have the power to reshape reality according to its will." "Can we stop it?" I asked. She looked at me with eyes that were already beginning to shift into mathematical symbols. "Maybe, but the cost might be higher than you're willing to pay. To sever the connection, someone would have to enter the doorway voluntarily, navigate to the prime reality, the original Louisiana from which all others branched, and destroy the quantum anchor that allows the Bayou monarch to exist in multiple states." "Sounds like a suicide mission," James said. "Not suicide," Dr. Hawthorne corrected. "Worse. The person who does this would be erased from all realities. They wouldn't just die, they would never have existed. Every impact they ever had on the world would be undone. The weight of that settled on us like the humidity before a storm. To save reality, someone would have to sacrifice not just their life, but their entire existence across all possible worlds. That left one marked winner unaccounted for. Michael Broussard, a shrimper from Terrebonne Parish who'd won $92,000. We couldn't find him anywhere. His boat was still docked, his house empty but undisturbed. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. Then, on the night before the equinox, he called me. "Officer Pancho?" His voice sounded like it was coming through water. "I'm in the swamp." "The eastern swamp. I can see the doorway. God Almighty, it's beautiful." "Michael, don't go near it. Tell me exactly where you are." "I'm everywhere," he laughed. "I'm in 1842 watching Jean-Baptiste Rousseau draw his maps. I'm in 1754 seeing the first Rougarou cross over. I'm in 2005 watching Katrina tear reality apart. I'm in 2087 watching the last human in Louisiana seal the doorway forever. Time isn't a river here, officer. It's an ocean, and I'm drowning in all of it at once." The line went dead. We tried calling back, but the number no longer existed. According to phone company records, Michael Broussard had never had a cell phone. According to the census, he'd never been born. "He's crossed over," Patricia said grimly. "That's 6 marked souls in our custody and 1 already transformed. The Bayou monarch has its minimum. Tomorrow night, it makes its move. We spent the night preparing. The elders performed ceremonies that hadn't been done in living memory. James and I loaded our weapons with ammunition blessed in 7 different traditions: Coushatta, Catholic, Voodoo, Hoodoo, Santeria, Norse. There was a surprising number of Scandinavian settlers in Louisiana history, and something Patricia called the original way that predated human speech. The casino was evacuated under the pretense of a gas leak. The 6 marked winners were placed in a circle of salt mixed with iron filings and crushed meteoric stone, the same material that had contaminated the levees. Dr. Hawthorne had calculated that this would create a null field, temporarily severing their connection to the Bayou monarch. But we all knew it was just a delaying tactic. When the equinox arrived, when the barriers between worlds became tissue-thin, nothing would hold the doorway closed. "There has to be another way," I insisted. "We can't just let someone erase themselves from existence." Patricia looked at me with ancient eyes. "Sometimes, Gary, the price of saving everything is losing something precious. Your ancestors understood this. That's why they accepted guardianship of this land, knowing that one day one of their descendants might have to pay the ultimate price." She handed me something, a small leather pouch on a cord. "This was your great-uncle's, the one who disappeared when you were 5. He didn't get lost in the swamp, Gary. He chose to enter it, to become part of the barrier that keeps the world separate. But his sacrifice is weakening now. The Bayou monarch has been feeding on it, corrupting it, preparing for this moment." I opened the pouch. Inside was a single tooth, but not a human tooth. It was crystalline, multifaceted, and when I touched it I could hear my great-uncle's voice speaking from 30 years ago and 3 realities over. "When the time comes, nephew, remember, we are not just guardians of a place. We are guardians of possibility itself. And sometimes, to preserve infinite possibilities, we must sacrifice our own." The equinox was 12 hours away. The marked winners were growing more unstable by the minute. The doorway in the swamp was becoming visible even from the casino, a spiral of light that hurt to perceive directly. And somewhere in the parallel Louisianas, the Bayou monarch was preparing to collect its ultimate jackpot, the consolidation of all realities into one, with itself as the house that always wins. The morning of the equinox came with omens that even the skeptics couldn't ignore. Every frog in Louisiana fell silent at exactly 6 a.m. The Mississippi River ran backward for 17 minutes. In New Orleans, street musicians found their instruments playing themselves, all the same tune, a melody that existed in no known musical tradition, but made everyone who heard it think of loss and infinite possibility. At the Coushatta Reservation, we were in crisis mode. The 6 marked winners we'd contained were deteriorating rapidly despite our precautions. Anthony Bergeron's skin had become transparent, showing not organs but entire miniature worlds beneath. Thousands of tiny Louisianas where different versions of him lived different lives. Maria Santos was speaking in tongues, but Dr. Hawthorne, who was still lucid enough to translate, said she was reciting GPS coordinates for locations that wouldn't exist for another 100 years. "The Bayou monarch is pulling at them," Patricia explained, "like a fisherman reeling in his catch. We need to act before sunset. Once darkness falls on the equinox, the doorway won't just be open, it will be irreversible. I stood in the tribal council chamber, looking at the assembled team. Besides James and myself, we had 3 other tribal officers, 5 elders, including Patricia and Joseph, and surprisingly a federal agent named Schuyler Cross, who had arrived that morning. "Agent Cross," I said, eyeing her suspiciously. "FBI? Not exactly," she replied, showing credentials for something called the Department of Ontological Security. "We've been monitoring dimensional anomalies since 1947. Roswell wasn't aliens, Officer Poncho. It was visitors from a parallel New Mexico where the Manhattan Project went very differently." "And you're just showing up now?" James asked incredulously. "We've been here all along," Cross said. "Who do you think provided the funding for your casino? It wasn't built for profit. It was built as a dimensional lightning rod to concentrate the anomalies in one controllable location. But something went wrong after Katrina. The system we designed to contain the rifts started amplifying them instead." Patricia laughed bitterly. "You thought you could control the swamp?" The arrogance of federal authority never ceases to amaze. "The Bayou monarch has been playing you from the beginning. Every safety measure you put in place, it corrupted. Every containment protocol became a doorway. Agent Cross pulled out a tablet showing satellite imagery of southern Louisiana. But this wasn't normal photography. It showed dimensional flux as waves of color rippling across the landscape. The epicenter was our swamp, but the effects were spreading. Baton Rouge was flickering between 3 different versions of itself. The French Quarter in New Orleans was occasionally slipping into a reality where it had never been rebuilt after the fire of 1788. "We have assets in place," Cross said. "Dimensional stabilizers at key points around the state. But they're failing. Whatever the Bayou monarch is, it's stronger than our models predicted. Because it's not just one entity," Dr. Hawthorne said from her containment circle. Her body was phasing in and out of solidity, but her mind remained sharp. "I've been analyzing its quantum signature. The Bayou monarch isn't a being, it's a convergence point. Every swamp spirit, every water deity, every folkloric monster from every possible Louisiana is feeding into it. Rougarou, Fifolet, Latiche, Grunch Road Monster, Honey Island Swamp Monster. They're all aspects of the same interdimensional organism. How do we fight something like that?" I asked. "We don't fight it," Joseph Abbey said quietly. "We negotiate with it." Everyone turned to look at the elderly keeper of oral histories. "The original compact," he continued, "made by the first people to discover the doorway, wasn't about keeping it closed. It was about maintaining balance. The entity you call the Bayou monarch was contained not through force, but through agreement. It would take only what the swamp naturally claimed: the careless, the lost, the ones who ignored warnings. In exchange, it would prevent other, worse things from crossing over." "What could be worse than this?" James asked. Joseph's expression was grave. "In the infinite parallel worlds, there are Louisianas where humanity never evolved, where the swamp itself is a conscious, hungry organism covering the entire continent, where the water is alive and malevolent. The Bayou monarch, for all its terror, has been protecting us from these realities. But the compact was broken when the casino started marking specific victims instead of taking random ones. The house always wins, I muttered, remembering the message on the slot machines. But someone changed the rules of the game. Agent Cross nodded. Our analysis suggests the casino's algorithm was hacked 3 months ago. Someone or something altered the payout system to specifically target individuals with certain quantum resonances, people whose dimensional signatures would be perfect keys for opening the doorway. Inside job, James said. Someone on our side is working with the Bayou monarch." Before anyone could respond, every electronic device in the building started screaming. Not alarms. Actual screaming, in human voices, in languages from across time and space. The containment circle holding our 6 marked winners began to crack, reality itself fracturing like broken glass. Through the cracks we could see him, Michael Broussard, the 7th winner who had already crossed over. But he wasn't alone. He stood at the head of an army of things that had once been human. I recognized some of them from our historical archives. The surveyor, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau. The missing bus passengers from 1974, my own great-uncle. All transformed into servants of the Bayou monarch. "The negotiation begins," Michael said, his voice coming from everywhere at once. "The monarch offers terms." The room changed around us. One moment we were in the tribal council chamber. The next, we stood in an impossible space, part casino, part swamp, part cosmic void. The Bayou monarch manifested not as a single form, but as a constantly shifting amalgamation of every legend Louisiana had ever birthed. One moment it was a massive alligator with human eyes. The next, a woman made of Spanish moss and regret, then a geometric impossibility that hurt to perceive. "The compact is broken," it spoke in a voice like 1,000 floods. "The balance destroyed by greed and ignorance. I offer new terms." "We're listening," Patricia said, stepping forward with more courage than I could have mustered. "7 souls I have marked, 7 anchors for the new reality. Give them to me willingly, and I will maintain the barriers for another century. Refuse, and I will take everything." "Counteroffer," a new voice said. We all turned to see someone I didn't recognize. A young woman in traditional Coushatta dress, but her clothing was from different time periods simultaneously. Pre-contact leather and beads, 19th century cotton, modern synthetic fibers, and materials that looked like they hadn't been invented yet. "Who are you?" Patricia asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. "I'm Gary's daughter," the woman said, "from a timeline where you accepted the monarch's deal today. I've come back, or forward or sideways depending on your perspective, to prevent that mistake. My daughter. I didn't have any children. Had never even been married. But looking at her, I could see myself in her features, mixed with... I couldn't tell. Her other parents seemed to shift, depending on the angle of view. In my timeline, she continued, you give the monarch the 7 souls. It keeps its bargain for exactly 100 years. Then it demands 7 times 7, then 7 times that. Each generation, the price multiplies. By my time, it owns every soul in Louisiana. We exist, but we're all servants of the swamp, puppets dancing to its will. Lies, the Bayou monarch roared. I seek only balance. Balance, my impossible daughter laughed. You seek dominion. In every reality where deals are made with you, the end is the same. Gradual consumption of human autonomy until free will itself becomes a memory. She turned to me. Dad, I know this is strange for you, but I need you to trust me. There's another way. The original compact wasn't made with the Bayou monarch. It was made with something else, something the monarch destroyed and replaced. We can restore it, but it requires a specific sacrifice. Let me guess, I said, my throat tight. Someone has to erase themselves from existence. Not erase, she corrected. Transform. Become the new guardian. Not serving the Bayou monarch, but replacing it. The swamp needs a consciousness to maintain the barriers between worlds. That consciousness doesn't have to be malevolent. Who? Patricia asked, though I suspected we all knew the answer. My daughter looked at me with eyes that held centuries of sorrow. the one who bridges two worlds, the officer who carries both badges, the modern and the ancient, the one whose bloodline has guarded this land for generations. Dad, it has to be you. The Bayou monarch's form shifted violently, becoming a storm of teeth and tentacles and impossible angles. No! The marked souls are mine by right of conquest. Actually, Agent Cross said, pulling out a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a tuning fork, they're not. According to interdimensional law, yes, that's a thing, souls can only be claimed if taken according to the original compact. You violated that compact when you started targeting specific individuals. Technically, you're in breach of contract. The entity howled, a sound that shattered reality into prismatic fragments. For a moment, I could see infinite versions of this confrontation playing out across infinite realities. In some, we were winning. In others, we had already lost. In most, the outcome was still uncertain. The equinox is in 3 hours, Patricia said urgently. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it soon. I looked at the 6 marked winners still held in their failing containment circle. Anthony Bergeron caught my eye and nodded. Do it, officer. We knew the house always wins. At least this way, we get to choose which house. The others agreed, even Dr. Hawthorne, who added, from a quantum perspective, being saved by erasing the need to be saved is quite elegant. I turned to my daughter from another timeline. If I do this, what happens to you? I fade back to my reality, which will slowly transform into something better. Or I cease to exist. Temporal paradoxes are tricky. But either way, the infinite Louisianas will be free from the Bayou monarch's hunger. And what about our Louisiana? It becomes what it was always meant to be. A crossroads, not a trap. The swamp will still be dangerous, still be mysterious, but it will be fair. Take only those who seek it, spare those who respect it. James stepped forward. Gary, you can't seriously be considering this. He's not considering it, Patricia said sadly. He's already decided. I can see it in his eyes. The same look his great-uncle had 30 years ago. She was right. The moment my daughter had appeared, I'd known what I had to do. It wasn't just about saving the marked winners or preventing the Bayou monarch's dominion. It was about fulfilling a responsibility that had been passed down through my bloodline for generations. How do I do it? I asked. My daughter pulled out something I recognized. My great-uncle's tooth, the crystalline one from the pouch. But it had changed, grown into something like a key. The doorway in the swamp, she said. You need to go there, alone, at the moment of the equinox. Use this to unlock not just the door between worlds, but the door between possibilities. Step through, and let the swamp transform you into what it needs, not a monarch, but a guardian. Not a ruler, but a guide. Stop! The Bayou monarch's fury was shaking the very foundations of reality. I will not allow this. You don't have a choice, Agent Cross said, activating her device. A field of stable reality expanded from it, pushing back the monarch's influence. Federal authority might not mean much in the swamp, but interdimensional law is enforced by powers that make you look like pond scum. She wasn't bluffing. Through the cracks in reality, I could see things responding to her call, entities of pure law and order, geometric angels that existed to enforce the rules that kept infinite realities from collapsing into chaos. The Bayou monarch, for all its power, retreated from them. You have 1 hour to leave this reality, Cross told it. Return to your original dimension or face erasure by the arbiters of cosmic order. The monarch's form collapsed into something almost pitifully small, a creature of mud and moss and bitter dreams. "This world was mine," it whimpered. "I made it special. I made it matter." "You made it a feeding ground," my daughter corrected. "But that ends today." As the monarch retreated, pulling its influence back through the cracks in reality, the marked winners began to stabilize. Their transformations reversed, leaving them human, but forever changed by what they'd experienced. They'd touched other realities and would never quite fit in just one again. "We should go," Patricia said. "The equinox waits for no one." We returned to normal space, the tribal council chamber reforming around us. My daughter was already beginning to fade, her timeline becoming uncertain as we moved toward changing it. "Thank you," I told her, "for warning us, for giving us a choice." "Thank you," she replied, "for being the father who would make this sacrifice." In every timeline where you exist, you make the same choice. That's how I knew I could count on you. She disappeared like morning mist, leaving only the crystalline key in my hand. The elders prepared me for the journey. They painted my face with symbols that existed in no alphabet, dressed me in clothes woven from materials that grew in multiple realities simultaneously, and armed me with weapons that were more concept than physical object. "Remember," Joseph told me, "you're not going to fight. You're going to become. Let the swamp take what it needs from you, but don't lose the core of who you are. That's what will make you different from the monarch. It consumed identities, but you must preserve them." James tried one more time to stop me. "There has to be another way. We can find another solution." "Sometimes there's no other way," I said, clipping both badges to my chest, the modern police badge and the ancient guardian symbol. "Sometimes someone has to stand at the crossroads and direct traffic between worlds. My family has been preparing for this duty for generations. It's time I accepted it." Agent Cross handed me a communication device. "This will work across dimensional boundaries. Once you transform, you might not be able to speak in human language anymore. But this will translate. Keep us informed of what's happening on the other side." As I prepared to leave for the swamp, the 6 marked winners approached me. Each one shook my hand, transferring something, a memory, a hope, a piece of their experience with other realities. "Bring them peace," Maria Santos said. "All the souls trapped between worlds." "Show them the way home," Tommy Landry added. "Or to new homes, if their old ones no longer exist." Dr. Hawthorne had written out equations on a piece of paper. "This is the mathematical formula for maintaining quantum stability across multiple dimensions. You probably won't understand it consciously, but your transformed self will know it instinctively." Anthony Bergeron, the oil rig worker whose transformation had started this final countdown, handed me a casino chip. "For luck," he said with a sad smile. "Though I guess where you're going, you'll make your own luck." The sun was setting as I reached the edge of the eastern swamp. The doorway was visible now, a spiral of light and possibility, beautiful and terrible, inviting and forbidding. The crystalline key in my hand was vibrating, eager to fulfill its purpose. I thought about my life, my childhood on the reservation, my training as a police officer, my years of service protecting and serving without truly understanding what I was protecting against. All of it had led to this moment. The equinox arrived with a sensation like the universe holding its breath. Every star in the sky seemed to pulse in unison. Every drop of water in the swamp reflected not just light but possibility. I stepped toward the doorway, key extended, ready to become something new, something necessary, something that would stand guard between worlds for centuries to come. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice, carried on the wind. "Tell the stories, Gary." Whatever you become, remember the stories. They're what make us human, even when we're something more. I inserted the key into a lock that existed in no single reality but in all of them simultaneously. The doorway opened fully, revealing not the swamp on the other side, but an infinite web of possibilities. Each thread a different Louisiana, a different Earth, a different choice that could have been made. And at the center of it all, a void where the Bayou monarch had been. A void that needed filling. A void shaped exactly like someone who had trained their whole life to stand at boundaries and keep the peace. I took a deep breath that might be my last as a purely human being, and stepped through. The transformation didn't hurt. That's what surprised me most. I had expected agony, the tearing apart of my human form, the violent remaking of my consciousness. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey, like finally fitting into clothes that had been tailored specifically for me across the span of centuries. I stepped through the doorway and found myself everywhere at once. I was in the swamp in 1718, watching François Delacroix's expedition discover the first doorway. I whispered warnings in their dreams, but human arrogance is stronger than human wisdom. They entered anyway, and I watched 3 men return who weren't the 3 who had left. I was in 1842, observing Jean-Baptiste Rousseau as he tried to map the unmappable. I was the resistance in his instruments, the impossibility in his calculations. When he finally understood that some territories shouldn't be charted, I was the relief in his final prayer. I was in 1754, when the first Rougarou crossed over. But now I understood the truth. It wasn't a monster fleeing its world. It was a refugee, escaping a Louisiana where the moon had been shattered and rained down as silver death. I gave it sanctuary, taught it to hide among human folklore, to take only what it needed to survive. I was in 2005 when Katrina's storm surge carried salt water into the depths of the swamp. I felt the barriers weakening, tasted the contamination of meteoric concrete in the rebuilt levees, witnessed the moment when the casino's algorithm was corrupted by something that should never have had access to human technology. But most importantly, I was now. Standing at the intersection of all possibilities, seeing every Louisiana that ever was or could be. And they were all beautiful and terrible in their own ways. Through the communication device Agent Cross had given me, I tried to speak. What came out wasn't words but concepts, transmitted directly. I am here. I am becoming. The void accepts me. From the tribal council chamber, I could feel their relief and sorrow. Patricia was crying, something she hadn't done since her husband's funeral 20 years ago. James was pacing, angry at me for leaving, angry at himself for letting me go. My daughter from another timeline. I could sense her too, fading back to her own reality, which was already beginning to change as my transformation rippled across the quantum foam. The Bayou monarch had left a mess, not just in our reality, but in all of them. Souls trapped between worlds, confused and corrupted. Deals half fulfilled, promises broken, boundaries blurred beyond recognition. My first task as the new guardian was to sort through this cosmic dysfunction. I found Michael Broussard first, or what remained of him. He was scattered across 17 different realities, each piece believing it was the whole. I gathered him together like collecting scattered playing cards, each one telling a different story of his life. "Officer Poncho?" he said, when I had assembled enough of him to think. "Is that you?" Yes and no. I am what Officer Poncho became. Are you ready to go home? Which home? I've seen so many versions. In one, I never went to the casino. In another, I own it. In a third, casinos were never invented because the French never came to Louisiana. The home where you belong. The one your soul chooses. I showed him the path back to our original reality, but also the other options. To my surprise, he chose a different Louisiana, one where he had become a marine biologist instead of a shrimper, where he had married his high school sweetheart instead of letting her go, where the bayous were protected sanctuaries instead of exploited resources. "Is that allowed?" he asked. "I am the guardian now. I make the rules, and my first rule is that everyone gets to choose their own story." One by one, I found the others. The survey team from 2003 that had merged into a single consciousness. I carefully separated them, giving each back their individuality while letting them keep the memory of unity if they wanted it. The bus passengers from 1974, some chose to return to their own time. Others asked to stay in the present, having lived full lives in the alternate Louisiana they'd been trapped in. My great-uncle was one of the last I found. He had been holding a portion of the barrier for 30 years, slowly being consumed by the Bayou monarch's hunger. When I touched his essence, he laughed. "Gary? Well, I'll be damned. You actually did it. Uncle Henri, you can rest now." "Rest? Boy, I've been resting for 3 decades. What I want is to go fishing. Is there a Louisiana where the fish are always biting and the beer is always cold?" "There are several. Take your pick." I sent him to a reality where he had never disappeared, where he had taught me to fish as he'd always planned, where we had decades of memories that felt real because, in that timeline, they were. But not everyone wanted to leave. Some souls had been between worlds so long that they had become comfortable in the liminal spaces. They asked to stay, to help me maintain the barriers. I accepted them as deputies in my interdimensional police force, each one responsible for monitoring a different aspect of the crossing. The 7th marked winner, Jennifer Tran, became my liaison with the real estate between worlds. She helped souls find new homes and realities that suited them. Robert Williams, the retired teacher, established a school for the accidentally displaced, teaching them to navigate their new realities. Even the Rougarou, freed from its centuries of hiding, became a guardian of the deepest swamp, warning travelers when they were approaching dangerous dimensional thin spots. Through it all, I maintained connection with my original reality. I watched as Patricia and the elders established new protocols for the casino. The algorithm was purified, returned to random chance instead of targeted selection. Winners, after 3 a.m., were no longer marked for transformation but blessed with a slight dimensional awareness, enough to appreciate the mystery of existence without being consumed by it. Agent Cross and her Department of Ontological Security set up a permanent monitoring station on the reservation. They worked with the Tribal Council, finally recognizing that indigenous knowledge and federal technology could complement each other instead of conflicting. James took over my position as head of the Tribal Police's new Dimensional Crimes Division. He wore both badges now, the modern and the ancient, though he complained that the ancient one made his uniform look asymmetrical and unprofessional. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, recovered from her near transformation, established a research institute at Tulane dedicated to studying dimensional physics. She published papers that revolutionized human understanding of quantum mechanics, though she had to leave out the parts about the casino and the swamp to maintain credibility with academic journals. The other marked winners found their own ways to cope with what they'd experienced. Anthony Bergeron returned to the oil rigs, but with new purpose. He could sense dimensional instabilities in the Gulf of Mexico, preventing disasters before they happened. Maria Santos discovered she could see illness across multiple timelines, knowing not just what disease a patient had, but what they might have had if different choices had been made. Tommy Landry's construction company specialized in buildings that were stable across dimensional shifts, important in a Louisiana where reality had become slightly more fluid. 3 months after my transformation, something unexpected happened. The communication device crackled to life with a familiar voice. "Dad?" It was my daughter from the other timeline. But her voice was different, younger, happier. "Dad, I know you probably don't recognize my voice. In this new timeline, I'm only 8 years old, but I dream about you sometimes. Mom says it's because you're watching over us from the swamp." Her mother's voice came through then, and I recognized it with a shock. It was Skylar, a nurse from the casino's medical center who I'd dated briefly years ago. In my original timeline, we'd broken up when she moved to Texas for a better job. But in this one, shaped by my transformation's ripples, she had stayed. "Gary," Skylar's voice said, "I don't know if you can hear this, or if you even remember us in whatever form you've taken, but Lily had a dream. That's our daughter's name, Lily. She dreamed that you were lonely out there between worlds. So we came to the swamp to talk to you." I manifested as much of myself as I could without breaking reality, a shimmer in the air, a whisper in the wind, a reflection in the water that looked almost human. I remember everything, every timeline, every possibility, and in all of them, I love you both. 8-year-old Lily laughed. "Daddy's voice tickles." They visited regularly after that. Lily would tell me about school, about her friends, about the drawings she made of the pretty lights in the swamp that only she could see. Skylar would update me on the reservation, on the casino's new policies, on the way the community was adapting to the new reality where the dimensional barriers were thinner but safer. One day, Patricia came alone to the swamp's edge. She was carrying something, a new badge, crafted from metal that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "For you," she said, placing it at the water's edge. "You're still police, Gary. Just with a much larger jurisdiction." The badge read, "Officer Gary Poncho, Interdimensional Peacekeeper, Protector of the Liminal, Guardian of all Louisianas. I can't wear it in my current form." "No," Patricia smiled, "but you can be it." A year passed. The autumn equinox approached. My first anniversary as Guardian. I had settled into my role, managing the crossed souls, maintaining the barriers, preventing intrusions from the darker Louisianas. But on the night of the equinox, something changed. The doorway opened on its own, and through it stepped someone I didn't expect, the Bayou monarch. Not as the terrible amalgamation of hunger and control it had been, but in a smaller, almost humble form. "Guardian," it said, and its voice was no longer the sound of 1,000 floods, but something almost conversational. "I've come to apologize. You tried to consume everything." "I was afraid," it admitted. "I was the first consciousness the swamp ever produced, born from the fears and stories of centuries. When humans came, with their complex souls and their stubborn individuality, I thought they were invading my territory. I didn't understand that consciousness could be shared, not just consumed. What do you want?" "To help, if you'll let me. I know every secret path through the dimensions, every hidden current between worlds. I was a terrible monarch, but I could be a useful guide. I considered this. Redemption was a human concept, but I was more than human now. And if souls could choose their own stories, shouldn't even a fallen monarch have that chance? You can stay, but you serve, not rule. You guide, not control." Agreed. And so the Bayou monarch became the swamp's first tour guide for interdimensional travelers. It was surprisingly good at it, having an encyclopedic knowledge of every Louisiana that ever was or could be. 5 years passed. The reservation had become a pilgrimage site for those who had been touched by dimensional shifts worldwide. The casino still operated, but it now included a museum of parallel realities, where visitors could safely glimpse other worlds without risking transformation. Lily grew into a teenager with a unique gift. She could see and communicate with beings from multiple realities simultaneously. She became my assistant in a way, helping newly crossed souls adjust to their situations, translating between the language of humans and the concepts of the interdimensional. "Dad," she said one day, standing at the swamp's edge with her mother, "do you ever regret it? Becoming this instead of staying human." I thought about it, examining all the timelines where I had made different choices. In some, I had refused the transformation, and the Bayou monarch had won, turning Louisiana into a feeding ground. In others, someone else had taken my place: James, Patricia, even Lily herself in one heartbreaking timeline. But in most of the good timelines, the stable ones where both humans and interdimensional beings could coexist, I had made this choice. Regret is for those who wish they had chosen differently. I had to become this so you could choose to become anything. Skylar squeezed Lily's hand. "He means he did it for us." "For everyone." "I know," Lily said, then louder, "I love you too, Dad." In every dimension, 10 years after my transformation, something unprecedented happened. The federal government, working with tribal nations across the country, officially acknowledged the existence of dimensional rifts. The announcement was careful, scientific, designed not to cause panic. Dr. Hawthorne led the press conference, explaining quantum mechanics in terms that made the impossible sound merely improbable. "We've discovered," she said to the assembled media, "that reality is more flexible than previously thought. Under certain conditions, particularly in areas of historical significance or emotional intensity, the barriers between parallel worlds can become permeable. The Coushatta Nation of Louisiana has been successfully managing one such area for generations." The reaction was mixed. Some people panicked, others were fascinated. Many simply refused to believe it. But for those who had been touched by dimensional shifts, and there were more than anyone had realized, it was a relief to finally have their experiences validated. The Coushatta Reservation became the official training ground for the newly formed interdimensional police force. James was appointed as chief trainer, teaching recruits how to recognize dimensional anomalies, how to help displaced souls, how to maintain their sanity when confronting impossible realities. "The key," he would tell each new class, "is to remember that you're not just enforcing laws. You're protecting stories. Every person, every soul, every consciousness has a story. Our job is to make sure they get to finish telling it, even if they have to tell it in a different reality than where they started." The casino evolved, too. It became the world's first interdimensional resort where visitors could safely experience other realities. The slot machines now showed glimpses of alternate lives, what you might have won in a world where you made different choices. The restaurants served food from parallel Louisianas, gumbo from a timeline where the French never sold the territory, jambalaya from a reality where Spanish influence was stronger, completely unique dishes from worlds where different cultures had settled the region. But it was always carefully controlled. The house still always won, but now what it won was stability, safety, the preservation of boundaries that kept the infinite worlds from collapsing into chaos. On the 20th anniversary of my transformation, Lily brought her own daughter to the swamp. My granddaughter, Emma, was 5 years old and could see me more clearly than most humans. "Grandpa Gary," she squealed, running to the water's edge. "Mommy says you're in charge of all the Louisianas." Not in charge. I just helped them stay separate while staying connected. Like a police officer? Exactly like a police officer. Emma pulled out a drawing she'd made. It showed the swamp as a great tree, with each branch being a different Louisiana, and at the trunk, a figure that was recognizably me, even in crayon form, wearing both my badges and surrounded by smiling figures from multiple realities. "My teacher says this isn't real," Emma said, "but I told her it's more real than regular real." Lily laughed. "That's my girl." Understanding paradoxes at 5. As they visited, I noticed something happening around Emma. Reality was responding to her differently than it did to most humans, even those with dimensional awareness. Where she walked, the barriers became more permeable, isn't the right word. They became more cooperative, as if the dimensions wanted to show her their best sides. "She's special," the Bayou monarch observed. It had been watching from its position as tour guide, now appearing as a friendly, if slightly odd, park ranger. "She has the potential to be a bridge without transformation, a human who can walk between worlds while remaining human." "Is that possible?" Lily asked, concern in her voice. "Everything is possible. That's what I've learned. The question is whether it's wise." Emma looked up at her mother with those wise beyond her years eyes that some children have. "Don't worry, Mommy. I'm going to help Grandpa when I grow up, but I'm going to do it different. He guards the doors. I'm going to teach people to build better ones." And in that moment, I saw it. A future where humanity didn't just coexist with dimensional rifts, but learned to use them wisely. Where crossing between worlds became not a crisis, but an opportunity. Where the stories of infinite Louisianas enriched rather than threatened each other. 30 years after my transformation, that future had largely come to pass. Dimensional tourism was regulated but common. The United Nations established the Council of Realities, with representatives from major dimensional hubs worldwide. The Coushatta Nation became one of the wealthiest tribes in America, not from casino revenues, but from their expertise in interdimensional management. Emma, now Dr. Emma, Poncho Brown, she had married a descendant of David Brown from a timeline where he became a physicist instead of disappearing into the swamp, had revolutionized the field of dimensional architecture. She designed structures that existed stably in multiple realities simultaneously, hospitals where doctors from different timelines could collaborate, schools where students could learn from the entire spectrum of human knowledge across all possible histories. "Grandpa," she said, standing at the swamp's edge with her own children, "we're thinking of building a permanent portal. Not a rift or a doorway, but an actual, stable, safe passage between specific realities. What do you think?" "I think your children will build things you can't imagine, just as you've built things I never dreamed of." Her youngest, a boy named Gary, after me, piped up, "Great-grandpa, are there realities where you didn't become the guardian?" "Yes. Would you like to see one?" With their parents' permission, I showed them a glimpse of a timeline where I had stayed human, grown old naturally, died surrounded by family. It was a good life, a happy timeline, but Louisiana in that reality was darker, more dangerous, with uncontrolled rifts causing chaos. "I like our timeline better," Gary declared. "Even if we can't hug you normal. This is normal for us. Every family has its own normal." 50 years after my transformation, on a quiet Tuesday that was an equinox in 3 realities but an ordinary day in ours, Patricia passed away. She was 143 years old, having extended her life through careful exposure to dimensional energy, but even that had its limits. Her funeral was attended by beings from 17 different realities. The Rougarou gave a eulogy in Old French. Spirits of the Homa, Chitimacha, and Atacapa, tribes whose physical presence had been erased from Louisiana but whose dimensional echoes remained, came to pay their respects. Even the Bayou monarch, now fully reformed and serving as the interdimensional postmaster, it had found its calling in helping messages cross between realities, wept genuine tears. As her body was laid to rest, her spirit appeared beside me in the dimensional space I occupied. "So," she said, looking exactly as she had in her prime, "this is what you see all the time. This and more. Are you staying? For a while. Someone needs to keep you company, and I want to see what my ancestors have been up to in the other Louisianas." She became my partner in a new way, helping souls transition not just between realities but between life and whatever comes after. She was particularly good with children who had accidentally slipped between worlds, having a grandmother's patience for their fears and confusions. 100 years after my transformation, Louisiana had become unrecognizable from the place I had known as a human. The swamps were preserved but accessible, with dimensional viewing platforms where tourists could safely observe parallel ecosystems. New Orleans had expanded into 3 different dimensions simultaneously, each version offering different cultural experiences. The French Quarter existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously flooded and dry, ancient and modern, depending on the observer's dimensional frequency. The casino still stood, though it was now more of a historical monument. A plaque outside read, "Here began the transformation of humanity from a single-dimensional species to citizens of the multiverse." Lily had passed away at 98, but she visited often from the dimension where consciousness persisted after physical death. Emma had transcended physical form entirely, becoming something like me, but different, a living network of dimensional connections, teaching rather than guarding. My great-great-grandchildren worked as dimensional archaeologists, exploring timelines where human history had gone differently, bringing back art and literature from worlds where Shakespeare was a woman, where the Renaissance happened in Africa, where steam power was never invented, but solar energy was discovered in ancient Egypt. "Ancestor Gary," one of them said. They had taken to calling me ancestor as great-great-great-great-grandpa was unwieldy. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if none of this had occurred? If the doorway had never been found? I don't wonder. I know. I can see those timelines. They're smaller, simpler, perhaps safer, but they're also less than what we've become." Less how? Imagine if humans had never left Africa, never explored beyond their first valleys. Safe, yes, but unexpanded. We've done the same thing but across dimensions instead of continents. 200 years after my transformation, I wasn't alone anymore. Other guardians had emerged at dimensional rifts worldwide, a schoolteacher in Japan who had become the guardian of the Tokyo Fold, a fisherman in Norway who managed the Arctic convergences, a grandmother in Kenya who supervised the Rift Valley portals. We formed a network, sharing the load of maintaining reality's stability. The Bayou monarch had evolved beyond recognition. It now existed as a beneficial symbiote with the Mississippi River itself, helping to manage the flow of water and dimensional energy simultaneously. It had found redemption not through forgiveness, but through fundamental transformation, becoming something that nurtured rather than consumed. "Old friend," it said to me one day, "do you think we're still the same beings we were when this started? No. You're not the monarch anymore. I'm not Gary Poncho anymore. We're what they needed us to become." And what's that? Stories that protect other stories. On the 500th anniversary of my transformation, time moves strangely when you exist in multiple dimensions. But humans still liked their celebrations. The descendants of humanity had spread across not just the galaxy, but across parallel versions of it. The little girl who had once won a jackpot at our casino had descendants living in a universe where physics worked differently, where music was a fundamental force and mathematics was an art form. Louisiana itself had become a myth, a legend of the place where humanity first learned to walk between worlds. Pilgrims came from dimensions so distant that they had to transform themselves just to exist in our reality long enough to visit. And through it all, I remained. Guardian, protector, bridge, storykeeper. The tribal police officer who had accepted an impossible responsibility and found it was exactly what I was meant to do. One day, or night, or that space between times that exists in the swamp, a young being approached me. They weren't quite human anymore, humanity having evolved into something that could naturally perceive multiple dimensions. Ancestor Guardian, they said. My title had grown even as my identity simplified. Why do you still maintain the boundaries? We can all cross freely now. Because even when everyone can cross, someone needs to ensure they can cross safely. Even when everyone knows the rules, someone needs to be the rules. That's what police are, in any dimension. Will you ever stop? Ever rest? Ever become something else? I thought about it, examining the infinite timelines that sprawled from this moment. In some, I continued forever. In others, I passed the responsibility on. In a few, the need for guardians disappeared entirely as reality itself evolved beyond the need for boundaries. When the last story has been told, when the last soul has found its home, when the last boundary has become a bridge, then I'll rest. But that day is not today. When will it be? In Louisiana, in the swamp where time flows backward and forward and sideways, there is no when. There is only now. And now I have work to do. The being bowed and departed, crossing 17 dimensions to return to their home. And I remained, as I always had and always would, at least in some timelines. Gary Poncho, Coushatta Tribal Police. Badge number eternal. Jurisdiction infinite, protecting and serving across all possible Louisianas. In the swamp where the cypress trees grow in perfect circles, where the water remembers everything that ever was or could be, where the casino lights reflect off infinite possibilities, I keep watch. Not because I have to anymore, but because this is who I am, who I chose to become, who I'll always be, in every dimension where choice exists. The house always wins, but I decide which house, and I ensure the game is fair. And in the Bayou, where jurisdiction ends at sunset, I am the sunset, eternal, beautiful, and marking the boundary between day and night, between known and unknown, between the world that is and all the worlds that could be. This is Officer Gary Poncho, signing off from everywhere and nowhere, from the Coushatta Reservation that exists in all times and no time. See you in another Louisiana. In fact, I'm already there.